Welcome everyone to another episode of Coral Living. Tonight we have a special guest with you, or this morning I should say. We got up early to do this today. But we've got TikTok sensation, Sam Blitz. welcome to the show, Sam.
Thank you. Much appreciated.
I think Blitz is his show name, but you'll have to track that down. No, we like it. Sam, he spends a lot of time on TikTok, and right on the front of his screen, when you look at it, it tells you exactly who he is. It says, I am a scientist, a socialist, an atheist, a Jew, and then some of the beliefs you throw up there are like pro-choice, pro-LGBTQ, anti-capitalist, no free will, and then if you disagree, come on in and debate with me. So, I don't know if we're going to do much debating, but we can talk about some of these subjects, we can unravel some of it. I thought kind of a good place to begin, which might have thrown some people off when I was introducing you, is that it says you're an atheist and then right under a Jew. And some people, they get a little like, what? What does that mean? So what's it like being chosen?
It's pretty great, I'll tell you that much. You hear about how it's something, I'll tell you.
Sounds awesome. So yeah, atheist Jew is it?
Yeah, so it's funny because whenever let me adjust my video. Whenever I do that live stream, and sometimes I do debate live streams, sometimes I do just science live streams. Whenever I do that live stream where I put up that whole list of things that I am and things that I agree and disagree with, probably the most frequent question that I get in the comments is, "How are you an atheist and a Jew? Isn't that a contradiction? How can you be this?" Blah, blah, and so I always end up answering it. So it's not the first time I've answered, of course. The deal is that Judaism is quite unusual as far as world religions go. It's not a major religion; it's just kind of an early one. There's only 14 million of us, right? And so the deal is that unlike Christianity, unlike Islam, unlike many other Western religions, Judaism is not it's not proselytizing, right? It doesn't seek out converts. And so since its inception, roughly 2,500 years ago, earlier depending on who you ask, there's just been a small group of people located mostly in the Middle East that have just been marrying each other for a really long time. And it wasn't until 100 years ago or so that people started to intermarry, that Jewish people started to marry non-Jewish people. So there's basically an ethnicity associated with Jewishness. Even if you look at me, I'm very clearly white. I'm way whiter than you guys. My family. If you go back, 400 years, it's mostly Austria, Hungary, the Czech Republic, Ukraine, that area of Eastern Europe, right? And then if you look at people from Spain, Jewish people from Spain, they're going to look brownish, right? They're going to, their families from North Africa or from the Middle East or from the Spanish Peninsula. But if you look at our DNA, and you can do this, we have more in common with each other than we do with other groups that are other, say, Christian groups or whatever that come from that same region. And this is just because of that large amount of intermarrying. So in that sense, Jewish people, Judaism is both an ethnicity and a religion. So when I say that I'm an atheist and a Jew, both my parents are Jewish, both their parents were Jewish, or all of their parents were Jewish. So ethnically, I have all of those genetic markers, and I have all the heritage and the tradition and the cultures associated with Judaism. I just don't have the theistic belief.
Yeah. Okay, so to just extrapolate upon that, so what you've explained the Jewish side, what does it mean to be an atheist nowadays? What is an atheist?
Yeah, so there are a lot of people who are, I would say, atheists nowadays. They probably went through some sort of angry atheist phase, especially if they weren't born into atheism, right? Yeah. There are people who are especially people whose family immigrated from China or from Cambodia or whatever, who's they just didn't have religion because it was kind of exterminated. But people like myself, I was raised Jewish, I had a bar mitzvah. And there are Christians who were raised, or ex-Christians, I guess, who were raised Christian. So when I was 18 and whatever, and I was really upset and hormonal, I guess, I was really mad about religion. And so I'm there definitely is no God. If there there was, I wouldn't want him, all of that whole thing.
Yeah.
But, people mellow out as they get older. So to me, like when I say I'm an atheist, I say that I don't know one way or the other, because it's probably impossible to know. But from the evidence that I've heard, from the arguments that I've heard, I would say that the arguments and evidence leans in favor, maybe with a 90-10 probability or something like that, in favor that there probably is not some deity. Yeah. So I would call myself an agnostic atheist. So I don't know.
That's what I was going to say, because it sounds like, and a lot of people, I think, they kind of arrive at that conclusion. They eventually say, well, I can't really say I'm an atheist, I'm an agnostic. They usually, they kind of come around to that. So in finding that agnosticism or atheism, growing through that, is that what led you to kind of take this scientific route for truth, or?
So it's just gonna sound like I'm telling my life story, right? So
like if you ask my mom,
no, it's cool. People in those lives will be like, oh, he just likes to hear himself talk. Yes, I do. That's why I do TikTok. That's why I'm here.
Nice job. I appreciate you indulging me. Louise. A lot of people, that's the case, but they don't admit it.
Yeah, I mean, anyway. So like, if you ask my mom, she'll say like, oh, he's wanted to be a scientist since he was like 5. And that's probably true. I don't remember, but that's probably true. So like, I've always liked science in school, and I've always liked, math and stuff like that. And, I would read these like, books by like Neil deGrasse Tyson and Brian Greene and Michio Kaku, like all, those books that you see at like the pop science parts of Barnes and Noble. And really, like this whole lack of belief, like it was, as a kid, it was never, oh, I actively despise religion. It was just like, my mom would take me to temple, or, I'd be prepping for my bar mitzvah or whatever. And, I would just be like, well, I mean, none of this is real, but, I'll do it anyway. So it was never like, I don't remember a time when I actually had a theistic belief.
Yeah.
I may have when I was a really little kid. I remember one story. It wasn't a story. This is probably one of my earliest memories, actually. I must have been 4 or 5, 6 or something like that. My mom took me to temple, and I didn't know what was going on. And, there were 2 rabbis up front, like the head rabbi and then like the associate rabbi or whatever. They were both wearing suits. And I asked my mom, are those guys God? And she said, no, those are the rabbis. And I'm like, oh, well then who's God? And she said, God's all around us. I'm like, well, okay. And I mean, obviously I was like a child, so I just stopped. But like, if I had to say like a formative moment for me, that was that. I'm like, well, that doesn't make sense to me. So I just assumed it was a story that I was being told. And so, the fact that I just kind of didn't have this belief, like it just didn't make sense to me, and I always wanted to be a science, it kind of just happened. I think like, almost in an unrelated way. Like they were just 2 separate things that just happened to me.
Yeah. Okay. And so you've gone through school now. You've chosen this pursuit of science. Obviously, I guess you went for a long time.
It was a long time. I loved it though, honestly. Like grad school was. People say grad school is harder than it is, but it's like if you love what you're doing, it's so easy for it to be the best thing because you don't have to write grant applications. Yeah. You don't have to. Worry about administrative duties. You just get to learn stuff and do what you like to do. So,
and now anyway, you're a professor, right?
No, so I'm a postdoctoral researcher. So it's like halfway between. It's kind of the in between step between finishing your PhD, which I have, and getting a professorship at some university. Okay. So it's postdoctoral after you finish your doctoral degree.
Okay, cool. And so now, so you've become now what a scientific researcher? Is that's what you do? What are you researching?
Yeah, so my degree's in physics. My degrees are in physics, and well, my PhD's in physics anyway. And so, but what I spent a lot of time in my physics PhD doing was actually pretty mathematical. Like it was, that's why I call myself a mathematical physicist, which is a thing. Because a lot of the work that I do is almost purely mathematics. Like I'm not looking at data from experiments. I'm not looking at, observations in the sky. But instead, what I'm doing is I'm taking problems in physics that are hard to answer, and then I'm using those as motivations to solve or to understand or think about challenging mathematics problems. So the university that I'm going to be working at in a month and a half, is it's at a mathematics department.
Yeah.
And so what I study is something called conformal geometry. It's a type of I don't even know how to describe it. It's a type of geometry. Like you learn in 8th grade or whatever. Or I don't know when people take geometry in high school, but you learn in high school geometry, right? You learn about triangles, you learn about hexagons and things like that. So conformal geometry is it's a vast generalization of the kind of things that you learn about in high school, which involves studying things like how do shapes change or how do structures change when you stretch and shrink and twist the underlying space. So like imagine you had a sheet of paper, you could twist it, you could maybe it has to be a rubber sheet, I guess. You twist it, you stretch it, you shrink it, and you can ask questions like, well, what happens to the angles inside a triangle when you do that? Yeah. That's a question that you could ask, and you'd find that depending on the shape of the rubber sheet, that angle might change. And so you can ask what things stay the same when you stretch, twist, all of that things, and what doesn't change. And obviously it gets more involved than that, but that's the rough area that I work in.
So do you guys use is this all conceptual, or do you show your work on a computer?
Oh yeah, well so both. So a lot of I feel like there's actually a misunderstanding of what mathematics is just in the general population, like what academic research level mathematics is. Yeah. It boils down to first you have to find some question that you don't know the answer to. This might be something that I'm currently studying. There are these structures that live in some abstract space, it's not two-dimensional space. We're talking 4, 6, 8, 10-dimensional, whatever. Some abstract space, and we want to know if actually a better explanation. Sorry, this is hard to explain.
Fine. Hey, I love it.
So you know how how you make a drum, you take like a cylinder and then you stretch rubber over it and then you can hit it and it makes a sound based on the the size of the drum, right?
Yeah.
So a question that you can ask, and this was a question posed in the 1950s, I want to say, is if you instead of using a circular drum, if you made it just some random shape and you stretch something over it, then you hit it, would you be able to figure out what shape it is just from the sound that it made?
Oh.
Right. And you could analyze the frequencies, the sound waves that it produced, and things like that. Maybe you could figure out, well, that means that there has to be a corner over here. And so there is this question in my area of conformal geometry that's very similar, which is basically it's kind of the opposite. If I tell you the shape of the drum, can you figure out what it sounds like? That's a question that's currently we think that the answer is yes. Obviously, I'm grossly oversimplifying here, but we think the answer is yes. The question then is, how do you figure out what the shape is like in the middle of the drum? Maybe the drum actually bends down, or maybe it bends up, or maybe it twists or something, and we're trying to understand what happens near the middle of the drum, whereas we have a good understanding of what happens near the edges. So that's a current ongoing problem, and so what we do is we try to we make a hypothesis, we make a conjecture, and then we basically try to logically deduce from some set of axioms or assumptions or other theorems that other people have proven whether that conjecture is true. And so, we'll write down 10, 20, 30, 50, 100 pages of this implies this, and then using this result, that implies this, and then eventually we hope to get down to the very last step where you say, and thus the original thing that we conjectured is true.
Yeah.
So that's the whole process, and it's a long process, and it's definitely not easy, and it's not something I'm super good at yet. Yeah. At least compared to colleagues.
What about a physical? Do you do this physically? Actually create these things with different shapes?
So that is one way to do it. There is something called experimental mathematics, where people actually will create experiments to verify their hypotheses. Yeah. But when you're working with a 6-dimensional drum, it's a little bit hard to make.
Yeah, I get it. Well, if you've watched any of the content that we put out, I don't know if you even looked at any of the stuff that we do. We go into all types of realms of study and looking at life through different lenses and stuff like that. And you being a geometry guy, you must have encountered in your TikTok world people who are bringing up the subject of sacred geometry, stuff like that. I don't know anything about it, honestly. I don't know anything about sacred geometry. So is there anything that geometry can teach us about the universe that, like, the common person might be like, you know, I don't know, might help advance humanity? Like, what do we? I'm sure there is, but like, what do you get from this whole sacred geometry talk?
Yeah, so I knew you were gonna say sacred geometry. So I have and you know, this might like clearly no offense meant to you guys because you guys are having me on.
Yeah.
But I have like I have a general disdain is too strong a word, but like
Contempt.
Contempt is too strong too. Mild dislike of people who kind of appropriate the language of mathematics and like science in general as a way to justify spiritual beliefs. Like, I'm fine with spiritualism as far as like, you know, self-improvement and self-contemplation go. But I see a lot on TikTok, and especially it's with the sacred geometry kind of thing, and things related to Nikola Tesla too. And you know, I've heard like this 369 thing a lot lately for some reason, where people will like kind of couch their spiritual beliefs that, you know, like all our minds are connected, and you know, we can reach an inner enlightenment and stuff. And then they say, and it's because of this, you know, it's because of general relativity and what Einstein said, or it's because of, you know, these special triangles that have certain, and I'm like you can have spiritual beliefs,
yeah,
separated from like these scientific notions. And it's funny, I actually had a conversation about this last night. It seems like people kind of reach out to this these mathematical or scientific notions as a way of like legitimizing what some people might view as like kind of strange beliefs, right? Because, you know, the modern world is less spiritual today than it was 50 years ago, say. Yeah. Or maybe it's trending back in the spiritual direction, but at least say in the early 2000s there was a period of like, you know, like lots of, you know, science was like the go-to thing, and like, you know, that if your thing was scientific, then that means that people believed in it. If it wasn't scientific, people kind of threw it aside. And so I think that there's this attempt to like kind of legitimize more modern spiritual beliefs, which, you know, whether or not they're valid or not, that's a different story, using the language of science. And so, to answer your question, sorry I talk a lot.
No.
To answer your question about sacred geometry, there are things that are like geometry in general. Like my perspective on physics is that at the end of the day, at the bottom of all the turtles, it's geometry. Like if you go down, the geometric structure is what gives what makes things make sense. Like there's a lot of funny rules and, you know, techniques and like algorithms that you kind of have to do when you're doing physics to study, you know, particles colliding in an accelerator or stuff like that. But at the end of the day, you can track all of those back to some geometric structures. But that doesn't mean that, like, for example, like some spiral with a particular ratio has some special connection to the human consciousness. So, like, I think that that geometry in our universe is fundamentally important. Like, it just explains how the universe functions. But I don't think that there is like some like special like spiritual associations with certain shapes and, you know, certain like fractals or patterns, or the golden ratio comes up a lot.
It seems like it's like what you're saying is you just don't like people shoehorning science into something like spirituality because, you know, maybe it can taint the science, you know what I mean?
And vice versa.
Sorry, go ahead.
No, you're good. I was just gonna say, and kind of vice versa. It seems like, like for a long time they were separate things, right? Like you had your spiritual beliefs and you had your scientific beliefs, and they just kind of coexisted. Like a lot of like almost every scientist before around the 1850s was Christian, at least in the Western world, and they still did great science, and they still had spiritual beliefs, and that was fine. But it seems like by mixing them, it kind of like reduces the quality of both.
Yeah, there's a famous kind of philosopher, spiritualist, scientist guy. His name's eluding me. Maybe you guys know who he is. He's been on Oprah a bunch of times, and that he does that kind of thing all the time. He'll be talking about like quantum physics and relating it to spirituality. But you can. I wish I knew his name. I can't think of it for the life of me. Deepak Chopra.
Yeah, I'm familiar with the type. Yeah. He doesn't have a great reputation in my circles.
Yeah, and I can see why a guy like that would bother or frustrate very scientifically minded people. And you know what? I'm not a big fan of his either. Like, a lot of times it just sounds like, man, you're saying a lot of big words, jamming them together, and, that's supposed to dazzle me. But, yeah.
So what do you think is, what is with this trying to blend science and religious
trying to legitimize spirituality.
Yeah. At least legitimize it to a scientific audience. I think that's really what it is. And it doesn't help that in the last 100 years, especially with the ascension of quantum physics as like kind of one of the most fundamental things about our universe that we've discovered, it doesn't help that it's very unintuitive and very confusing and hard to explain to a layperson. And so because it's so hard to explain, people can straight up lie, and it'll sound like it's just confusing science.
They reduce it too much. I find oftentimes the layperson will be like, just give it to me straight. Don't give me a big convoluted explanation of what's going on here. Make it so that a kindergarten could understand it. But sometimes you're not telling the truth anymore if you dumb it down to something like that, because you're leaving out all kinds of parts of the fact of the matter.
Yeah.
To reduce it down.
I think to some degree, somebody who really understands something should be able to explain it. If you give them enough time, of course, to anybody. Like, I'm not one of those people who's like either you're born being able to know math and science or not. Like, I think the reason why I'm good at what I do is because I had excellent my mother really instilled in me a curiosity when I was a child. She would read to me and show me PBS TV shows and things like that. And I went to a really good school where they really instilled this notion of investigative learning, and I don't think that I'm in any sense special. I think that perhaps I don't socially interact as much as I should, so maybe I spent too much time on math as a kid. But besides that, I think it's just a matter of curiosity and interest, and I think anybody could learn it. But people are busy. When you're 35 and you have a job and you have kids or a family or whatever, you don't want to spend 6 hours watching some guy writing on a blackboard so you can understand the first 3 sentences of this textbook. It's just not. You have better things to do.
I was the opposite. I was terrible at math, man. I was I had zero interest in it as a child. You must be just drawn to it. Some people I found, the guys that were good at math, they all loved doing it. And then
I think that it's actually a really good question, because on the one hand, clearly genetics play a role in some ways that our brain work, right? That has to be a thing.
Yeah.
Because you can take I'll just leave it at that. But on the other hand, there is a certain degree in which I think that a good math teacher can really change the way that people view math. And it's not even just how well they teach it, but how well they motivate it and make it interesting for students. Because a 7 or 8 year old is going to think very differently than an 18-year-old, and so you have to tailor it so that they find something fascinating in it. Because kids are curious, right? Every kid is curious, I think.
Yeah.
It's just a matter of what they're curious about. And if you can find something in mathematics or science or whatever that they are curious about, I think that you could convince a 6 or 7-year-old to really throw themselves into something and then, learn it. Whatever that may be. Maybe it's biology, maybe it's engineering, maybe it's architecture, maybe it's expressionist painting of the early 20th century or whatever it is.
Yeah.
I think that you can train curiosity or instill curiosity if you have a good enough teacher, or a teacher that's interested enough. I don't know.
It seems
I'd like to think that there's no fundamental restriction. It would feel very self-centered to say, "Oh, I was just born better at math than you." I don't think that can be true. Maybe I don't know. It just seems strange.
It might have something to do with seeing value in something, and at a young age you saw value in it.
I feel like it's my sense that I get is that some people can actually hold those massive equations in their mind's eye, or they have. I do believe that there is varying ability. I suck at math too, so I'm excluding myself from this. But I do think that there's something people can have varying mental traits and abilities, and one person may have a stronger ability to do math or hold those ideas in their head or quantities in their head, as opposed to somebody that can't they can't track the math, because it's all procedural and all this stuff. Like they can't keep it in their mind, and probably won't. I do think that there are some, but that's not the end of the world, because that leads into other things. Like, just because you're very good at one thing, obviously you can be somebody can be deficient in another way, and all over the board.
So I think that that's probably true. Like, there is certainly like a sense of numeracy, which is like a well-known thing, and like, people will have dysgraphia, dyscalculia, which is like it's like dyslexia but with numbers. Like, you have a hard time like thinking about like strings of digits, right? And like manipulating them. But the thing is that's not what like when I do mathematics, that's not what I'm doing. Like, I'm not sitting there multiplying 12-digit numbers, right? That's not what mathematicians do. Mathematics is just a way of thinking about the world in like a logically consistent way. And so it's like, I get why, at least in the United States, the way that we teach mathematics is, you start with addition and subtraction, then you do multiplication and division, and you have these procedures for doing these things, because those skills are actually useful in the real world, right? Like, you need to know how to figure out the tip on your bill. You need to know how to figure out how to budget your income for the month. Like, these are things that adults need to know. But it's a shame, because when we teach mathematics that way, if you ask any person on the street who didn't do math at a university level, they just think math is a series of, it's a recipe. A teacher gives you numbers, and then you do a recipe to them and you get a new number out, but there's not really an understanding of, what this represents, or even the deeper ideas. But you could instead teach mathematics in a more, this would be my dream, teach mathematics in like a more research-oriented setting, even from a young age. Like, what does it mean? Or like almost with application in mind. Like, if I handed you a bag full of if I handed you a bag full of a red block, a blue block, and a yellow block, how many different orders could you pull those blocks out of the bag? That's a very different question than what is 39 times 16, right?
Yeah.
And that's a question that like you can kind of see why someone might care about it. And it has similar answers, but now you think about it, it's not just about manipulating numbers anymore. It's about, kind of like counting in a way, and then trying to figure out, well, why are these two orders different? What makes them different? And then like so you can think about it kind of in a more, it's almost more applicable, or it's almost more real, but also at the same time more abstract. And I think getting away from this notion of, just manipulating numbers and multiplying, dividing, and, things like that, I think that would make people realize that math is a very different thing than people give it credit for, and it can be a lot more interesting.
It's like a language or something. Like, it's
yeah.
What you just said there was like, I've already lost track of it, but I thought it was remarkable, just the way you explained that, there's more to it than that, and how you look at it, might change your relationship to it, and
which leads me kind of like, let's take this to the even more fun, exciting level. Is that with like, obviously you're involved with the scientific community. Do you follow like what's trending in the scientific advancements happening right now in our world? And if so, like anything, like the Hadron Collider, what is science like producing or showing humanity that maybe some of us may not be aware of, that is like exciting and like, oh my god?
Yeah. So to answer your first question, I guess I'm bad at TikTok, because like there are a lot of science creators out there, like a lot, and some of them are great, some of them are less great. I'm not gonna name names, but like it seems like they're like reporting on stories that are like this new discovery at the Hadron Collider, blah blah blah. But like my updates in the scientific community come from like a listserv of journal papers that I get every morning, and I scroll through those and see if I find something interesting. Yeah. And then later in the day, if I come up with some interesting random idea for TikTok, but like I'm not like seeking out stories like in popular science, because TikTok's not my job, and like it's just something I like do casually. So like there is some degree which I don't really pay attention to things outside of my field. Like I'm not paying attention to like new nanomaterials discovered that blah blah blah. I do happen to pay attention quite a lot to what's happening at the LHC, if only because I spent a lot of my undergraduate time working on particle physics. Similarly, this whole gravitational wave stuff, I spent a lot of my time also in undergrad and in graduate school thinking about black holes and cosmology and things like that. And similarly with the James Webb, those are things that catch my eye quite a lot. And so like I won't seek them out, but if I'm scrolling through Reddit or whatever and I see something because I'm on like the science subreddit or the physics subreddit, I will go take a look at those things. So I am somewhat familiar with some of these new developments. I'm probably not most up to date, but as far as like real world applications, the downside of a lot of the physics that I like, this is particle physics, fundamental physics really, cosmology, astrophysics, the study of where a universe came from, how it formed, how do black holes work, what are particles made out of, all those things. They actually, like, since like maybe the 1950s, they haven't really had any application to the modern world, like at all. Zero at all. If you ask a condensed matter physicist, and these are people who study like materials properties, things like that, they study different like they'll do like metamaterials, or like they're studying superconductors, things like that. Those people, even the theorists, they get millions of dollars of grant money because the first group that discovers a room temperature superconductor will win the Nobel Prize, certainly, and will revolutionize the world, like completely revolutionize the world, because that means that we won't need losses anymore in transmitting electricity, right? You can just build your cables out of the superconductor, and now your efficiency is 100%. And so, like this would have like huge military applications, because you don't have radiative losses when you're like in a submarine. So you like nobody will pick up on your small infrared emissions because you're giving off energy. This will have huge applications for industry, because now profits can be higher because you're not losing energy. Like that will change the world. Yeah. And we're inching closer and closer to that. But that's not my area.
Yeah. It's just fascinating.
It's just fascinating. Yeah.
So and there's a sense in which there's almost like a sense of derision amongst people in my area to those people, because they're like, oh, they do applications, right? They do things with applications. They're not really interested in fundamentally what makes their universe work. They're just trying to solve problems rather than trying to understand, right? So what they're doing at CERN isn't going to affect any of us for 100 years, at least. But there are some things to come that are fruitful. Like CERN helped develop the World Wide Web. Like because they had to transmit large amounts of data in the the 80s and 90s, they developed interconnects between computers that eventually led to the World Wide Web. So there, and the ability, like various technologies that were invented there. As this CERN is where the LHC, by the way, is. In case you didn't know, there are various technologies like supercooling technologies, because they have to use superconductors in their superconducting magnets in their facility. Some of those technologies have seen applications in medical science, for example, for like CT scans. So there are offshoots of application that come about from the Large Hadron Collider, from CERN in general, from particle physicists. These kind of things happen. But no, not really any direct applications. It's more just about like how our universe works, which is why I'm interested in it.
Well, I think that's pretty damn important to understand how our universe works.
but there's a reason why we don't fund it well, right? Because it's not going to give increased profits to whatever corporation or whatever in the next 50 years.
But if you dig deep enough, it could lead to something deeply profound for humanity.
Oh, 100%. I think so too. Like the ideas are, I mean, just so in the 1950s, when it was discovered that the universe seemed to be expanding, this was something that, we discovered the cosmic microwave background, we discovered that the universe was expanding. These are things that were discovered. That was world shaking, right? Because up until then, the accepted model was that the universe was static and eternal. It didn't change. Just things moved around in it, but it wasn't growing, it wasn't shrinking, it didn't have a beginning, it won't have an end, it'll just always be here. But when that was discovered, that meant that there was a beginning. If the universe was expanding now, it must have been smaller in the past. and you can't get smaller than 0, so there must have been a beginning, at least some kind of beginning. And so, like just imagine, like, this is the whole Big Bang thing. Like that's a world-shattering, like, paradigm shift in how we think about how the universe works. So, there are, like, major philosophical ideas that can come from this. Like, quantum mechanics is the same thing, right? Like, the idea that fundamentally things might not be predictable, like, that's a big deal. Like, because then what does that mean for questions about free will? What does that mean for questions about, like, omniscient, like, or omniscient deities? Like, there's a whole bunch, like, of philosophical questions that are opened up. So I think it's fascinating.
Now you're talking. So is the universe infinite?
I think so.
Yeah, I think sometimes even spiritual people, they kind of put, like, the scientific materialist people into some type of a box and assume that they're, like, these soulless mechanical cogs that only study the purely rational and only. Is there more to it than that? Is there something deeply, like, I don't want to use any spiritual terms like divine or mystical about it, but what do you use when you're looking into the infinite vastness of the universe? What do you say? It's still deeply awe.
It's hugely profound. So story time, and my wife's gonna hate this because I tell the story a lot, and she gets embarrassed every time she hears it. So are you guys familiar with the Hubble Ultra Deep Field?
Yeah, this is the new telescope in space or whatever.
So the Hubble telescope was the one before it launched.
Oh, James Webb is the new.
Yeah, James Webb is the one that's today, or that's now. But in the early 2000s, the Hubble Space Telescope took a picture. It did basically what the James Webb did recently. Yeah. It took a picture of a really tiny region of space, and it pointed at that tiny region of space for, like 6 hours or something, and just collected a bunch of light. And basically, it showed us the first picture of kind of like what deep space actually looks like the thousands, millions of galaxies in this tiny little region. And so, this is something that, like, kind of shook me when I was a kid. But I had since seen it a lot, and, I came to terms with it. My wife had never seen this picture up until maybe 3 or 4 years ago. We were talking, I don't remember what we were talking about. And I showed her this picture, and she started to cry. Because it's like, on one sense, it's, like, breathtakingly beautiful to know that there's all of these things out there. On the other hand, like, it shows you how, like, small and insignificant we are, right? Like, she wasn't sobbing, but, she was like, it's overwhelming. So there is a sense in, like, and I think this is how all scientists work. Like, we all think that the universe is in some way, it's, like, miraculous perhaps isn't the word, but it's almost like when you look at these things for the first time, or when you think about some of these ideas that, perhaps the universe really is infinite, it's an almost spiritual thing, in that, like, spiritualism is all about, like, the craving to understand what lies deeper, right? Like, what is beneath the surface level,
to
right, that we experience.
To find some truth, meaning.
And so, scientists are humans too. We get that too. Like when I was talking, this is gonna sound silly. When I talk about the Hubble Ultra Deep Field, I get goosebumps because it's amazing. Like, it's beautiful. It's elegant. It's it's all of these things. And so like it's that feeling as a human. It's a weird thing for a person to say. It's that feeling that drives scientists to investigate. That's why we do it, because we want to know. We want, like, that that feeling of, like, goosebumps when you talk about something that's ultimately, like, beautiful and almost spiritual. That's a thing that humans like to experience, right? And so we do it because then we get it more, right? When you discover something new about the universe that changes your worldview, that's incredible. And it happens to be that there's a really good way to make those discoveries, and that's through the scientific method.
Yeah. So I wonder if it literally produces, like, chemicals in your brain, dopamine, make you happy.
100% it does. That's why goosebumps happen, right? 100%. Yeah. Like when I'm not going to share my screen. When I was, like, a kid, I always wanted to be a scientist, right? But I remember the first time when I'm like, I'm going to be a physicist, and it was because I saw an artist's rendition of a black hole. Like, you have the swirly stuff and the stuff coming out. This was, like, I must have been 9 or 10. But, like, this was the coolest thing to me. I'm like, I have to understand that. I have to know how that works. It was like it wasn't some logical, like, I just, beep boop, I must understand, assimilate. It was just like, this is amazing to me.
Yeah.
I have to know more.
Yeah.
And so then you follow down the road, and now I know more. Now I know how that works.
Yeah. Are you open to the idea that maybe 100, 200, 500 years from now, there might be a new way of observing or understanding all of this that kind of transcends the scientific method?
It's a really good question. So the scientific method is like 500-ish years old, 400 years old at this point.
Yeah.
I think it was Sir Francis Bacon that kind of like laid it out. I don't remember when he lived. So it's been going pretty strong for a good while.
Yeah.
I think that, well, so it is interesting because the scientific method has changed, right? Like astronomy, you can't do the original scientific method requires experimentation, right?
Yeah.
Like it's what is it? It's observation, hypothesis, experiment, analysis, conclusion, or something like 5 steps. But you can't go out and just like see what happens if you build a star, right? Like you can't run an experiment to test your hypothesis about star formation, for example.
Yeah.
So instead, astronomers, in order to do astronomy, astronomers, cosmologists, in order to do astronomy and cosmology, they kind of have to change the experiment part of the scientific method to observation. So you make a hypothesis about something that you haven't seen, and then you go look for it, and if you find it, then that is like experimental evidence, but really it's observational evidence. So I would not be surprised if the scientific method changed, but I think this idea of observing something you don't understand, guessing what that thing is, and then trying to figure out if that guess is correct, I think that that's a fundamentally sound way of determining truth about our universe.
Yeah. Well, even in probably spirituality, that's probably how spirituality's probably grown by like testing and I'm gonna pray 5 times a day and see if anything in my life changes, or it's probably something to that. But is there any like limitation in the fact that one, we're humans doing this science, right? Like that is dramatically limiting if you think about it, because we only have our 5 senses. We have like this physical makeup that is us, and these chemicals that we do, and then we go out there and we try to interpret this infinite realm through our limited capacity. Like, what if something changed in us over the next 1,000 years that gave us a 6th sense? Or, we could be surrounded by beings already that we just can't see because we're limited by the faculties that we have.
Yeah, it's a really interesting question, right? So there's this notion that like, as conscious beings, whatever consciousness may be, that's a completely separate question.
That's a
whatever
giant
consciousness may be,
rabbit hole to jump down.
Yeah. Whatever that may be, like we could all, like I could be the only conscious thing in the universe. You guys could all be figments of my imagination. I could just be a brain in a bat.
Solipsism.
Right? Yeah, like that could be the case. However, I think that like if we're going to exist in a universe and try to learn about it, we can't work under that assumption. There's no like if you can't trust your senses, at least to some degree, then you can't learn anything. So we kind of just have to ignore that and just kind of assume that what we
do the best with what we have.
Do the best with what we have, right? Now, there are people, like it's funny that you brought up like adding additional senses. People do this actually, which is wild. Like with body modifications, you can get tiny magnets implanted into your fingertips, and then you can feel magnetic fields. It's wild, and it's something that I've thought about doing, but I'm very squeamish about things in my fingertips. So
that's transhumanism there, right?
It is, yeah, it is. But like that kind of thing, like being able to like it would be very strange. Like our brains aren't, like we're not wired to kind of process that. Like I've read stories about about people, like their brain, they'll have these magnets implanted in their fingers, and then their brain kind of rewires itself to be able to process that in addition to the other sensory information that they have. So like they can, just by walking around, they can feel like which way's north. And they just kind of like intuit that because, the magnets of their fingers will tell them, that means if my finger's that way, then, it's such and such a thing. And, they can like electricians, like I've seen electricians that do this because then they can, feel where wires are live.
Yeah.
So there are certainly ways that we could imagine, and especially with like advancing technology, that we could enhance our system to to perceive more. The question of whether or not we can perceive more than we can already do with machines, at least like on a principle level, is a harder question to answer. Like, I don't know what it would mean to like be able to perceive. Like, we couldn't even do this with a machine, to perceive what like a fourth dimensional thing is, because we like, if you try to think about like a 4D cube, like you're gonna fail. You're like, you can talk about it, you can describe it, but you can never visualize it, right? So I don't know. It's a really hard problem. Like whether or not what we actually see with our or what we detect with our senses is what we actually observe is there. There is a second side to this, which I think kind of answers the question that what our senses tell us has to be at least somewhat accurate. Because there's a question that, well, if you accept evolutionary biology, then our senses evolved to help us survive in the plains of Africa, right? But there's nothing saying, in principle, that what helps us survive on the plains of Africa is actually an accurate representation of what actually exists, right? It could just be that, for example, that when we see two lions, or when we see what actually is one lion, our brain and our eyes actually interprets that as five. And so we run away better because we're more afraid. But maybe there's only one lion there. That would mean that our senses don't line up with reality. But my counter-argument to that is just, well, look, maybe our senses don't line up with reality, but our senses are consistent with what we can build that should line up with reality. We can build tables, and we can intentionally build tables with, say, 3 legs, and then those tables don't fall over. So if they only had 1 leg, they'd fall over. So, even though we can't be sure that our senses don't line up with reality, they probably do, because we can build things that also sense things, and then we can see how, like, it doesn't appear like there's inconsistencies with the things that we build and the things that they detect. So, I don't know. I think that our senses are probably pretty good, but they're certainly limited.
Yeah. Now, you have like a list of questions. Do you want to drop any?
No, I'm okay.
Okay.
This is going pretty organically already.
Yeah. I had another question that I wanted to ask you about simulation theory and all
Sure.
that fact. Are we hallucinating, or is this real?
Yeah, I wish I could give you that answer. No, so the weird thing about the simulation hypothesis, and by the way, you'll hear that I use like hypothesis rather than theory because I try to be specific about that kind of language. But this whole thing about the simulation hypothesis is it's a very interesting phenomenon, because I think it was like first talked about in the 90s, right? When computers kind of took hold, and you'll hear like serious scientists like Neil deGrasse Tyson and these serious science popularizers, anyway, talk about this as if it's a real possibility. And it's like one of those things that's like, it's almost like a conspiracy, or it's almost like a spiritual belief, that because it's very hard to get away to like dismiss it. Now, my opinion is that, I think that this is real. I don't think that we're in a simulation. And the reason I think that is because it seems like there is a maximum amount of information density that you can have, and this is called the Hawking page entropy. It's the entropy associated with black hole, which tells you about maximal information density. It's a whole thing. But the point is that it seems to be the case that there's a finite amount of energy information that you can store in a given region. And it's basically the amount of information that would be stored in a black hole of equal size. And our universe seems to have that maximal amount of information, which says to me, if you're going to simulate a universe like ours, which has the most possible information that you can have in a volume this big, it would have to be simulated on an even bigger computer. Like the computer, it couldn't be like some super advanced desktop computer, because if you had all of the information in our universe on that super advanced, alien desktop computer, the desktop computer would collapse into a black hole. So it seems like our universe is too detailed that it could even in principle be simulated on a computer that's smaller than it. And so that, combined with my belief, which I think I have good reason to believe, with the fact that our universe seems to be infinite, would suggest that you would have to have an infinitely large computer to simulate it.
Yeah, which, bigger wouldn't have to be infinitely bigger?
Well,
exactly.
It
would have to be bigger and infinite, and so you can't have bigger than an infinite computer, or you can't have something that's bigger than an infinitely large universe. So it just seems like it's impossible.
Well, that's
to
funny.
simulate
I've heard
it.
that there's levels to infinite, that there's bigger types of infinites.
Right. So mathematically speaking, there certainly are, but typically when we talk about volumes, when we talk about volumes, lengths, durations, sizes, that is the one type of infinite, in that it's a continuous infinite, i.e., if I were to talk about all of the numbers, like all of the possible numbers that you could think of, 9, but also pi, but also like 0.96, and it goes on forever, whatever it is.
Yeah.
That is a certain value of infinite, and that's the one that we typically ascribe with, like, if our universe was infinite in extent, it would just be basically that level of infinite. It's the same way with, like, if time goes on forever, it would have that much infinite to it. That's kind of like the natural infinite, and then there's the slightly smaller infinite, which is the number of whole numbers, 1, 2, 3, all the way up to infinity.
Yeah.
That's a smaller number, and then there's larger infinites, which we can't really comprehend. Or we can't build intuition for, but we can describe them mathematically.
Yeah.
But it's really just like that middle one that I was just talking about, which is kind of the fundamental one that I'm talking about when I say, our universe is infinite in extent.
Yeah. When it comes to like the simulation theory or hypothesis, it's also kind of woven into spiritual circles too.
Yep.
They talk about a lot in spirituality, kind of like the only thing that is consciousness, and that they kind of see everything we're doing here as like it's a dream. And they're also in spirituality. There's a giant view that kind of it's a holistic view that they believe the universe is infinite, but it's just consciousness imagining itself, and that it's kind of what we're doing, but similar, kind of. I don't know.
So I mean, there is, like, it could be the case that every human is really a brain in a vat, and the universe isn't infinite. We've just been programmed to think it is, right?
Yeah.
Like that's a possibility.
Yeah.
And then maybe eventually, if our programmed brains came up with some programmed spaceships, we would run into some hard limit. Oh, you can't go further than here because there's a black hole surrounding it, and you just can't go out. Sorry. So the universe actually is infinite. Maybe there's some
what's on the other side of that hard layer?
Yeah. Well, maybe it's some hard-coded, like boundary to our world that they never thought that we would get to, but we did anyway. If that were true, that we are that like our perceptions do not, like our perceptions are coded in rather than being observed in a simulated reality, like virtual reality type thing. Well, then you could have a simulation. That's possible. But again, that means that we can't trust our senses, and I think that we have to. I don't think that there's an alternative.
Yeah. All right, well, I want to take a giant shift in our conversation because we've been doing, science, but you're not all about that. I'm fascinated. I want to know some of your thoughts on, because, you say you're a socialist and that you got some problems with capitalism.
Yep.
And I'm kind of passionate about this. I don't know what the answer is. All I know is that the system broken big time.
Yep.
So the systems were like, and it's wildly corrupt. Corrupt. So I would love to hear some of your views on that. So maybe we could start with the bending of socialism and capitalism and talk about maybe that. What's your beef, I guess, against capitalism?
Yeah. So first. In like the 50s and 60s and 70s, I'm sure you guys were aware, there was this whole Red Scare thing, right? Like during the Cold War, if you were a communist, you could lose your job legitimately. Like you could be put on a list by Congress people, and then they would call the FBI and they'd tell your job and they'd say, look, either fire this guy or you're going to jail. So like that was a thing. So certainly there's this fear over socialism and communism that exists in the United States, which is unfortunate, and it's a result of geopolitics basically. But my issue with capitalism is not that it's inherently evil. Well, okay. It's not that it's the worst system that we could have, because before capitalism we had mercantilism. These are things like the East India Trading Company, right? And like those kind of things where you have like government owned companies that kind of like operated for, it was like a weirder system. And then we had feudalism before that, which is, just lords that owned stuff and then made their serfs work and then took almost everything. So like capitalism is an advancement over mercantilism, which was an advancement over feudalism. I think all of these are kind of like a progression, getting better and better, more equal and more equal. My problem with capitalism is not that it's inherently wrong, and I think that if it were not for the capitalistic evolution of the last 150 years or so, or maybe 170 or so, that we would have that we would be so much better. I think that capitalism, like it brought billions of people out of poverty.
Yeah.
I just think that we reach a limit, perhaps once people are no longer living on no longer actually dying of starvation, right? Like, we're getting there. It still happens in some places, but maybe once we get there, it's time to move on to a system that, it's not just about making sure that everybody can eat, but it's about making sure that people can have fulfillment in their work life as well as in their home life.
Amen.
So, So my issue primarily is just that, at least in places like the United States, where it's the richest country on the planet.
Yeah.
We have enough money, like just flowing through our economy, that it wouldn't be necessary for, say, I don't know, we don't have to work 40 hours a week. It's not a thing. If you go ask somebody in an office job, they maybe do 15 hours of work week, and then the rest is just pushing paper. That doesn't actually accomplish anything, doesn't produce any value. But it's done basically because, a little bit more value is extracted here and there. But that value, that extra time, that extra value isn't going towards, making people's lives better. It's just going towards effectively keeping the people who run these companies and so on, keeping them in a position of power. And, the way that you can solve that is not by, maybe you can automate it away. That was Andrew Yang's hope, right? His thing is, we're reaching an automation problem, and so, maybe we should just do UBI. I think that's a fine idea, but in the past, when we've had automation take away people's jobs, right, and this is a thing that has happened in the past, like factories used to be run by people, now they're primarily run by robots. It's not like the old factory workers just worked fewer hours and got paid the same amount. The factory workers just worked fewer hours, got paid less, and now the people who run the factories make more. And so my problem with capitalism is that it gives perverse incentives to people who own companies. Capitalists, these are the people who own capital, gives perverse incentive to continue to extract profit without increasing necessarily the well-being of the people in their community.
Yeah.
Nobody wants to work 40 hours in a factory. So when automation comes around and replaces, 30 hours of your 40-hour work week, you don't now get to work 10 hours. You just get paid a quarter as much. And so the communities know better. The only person who's better off is the person who's owning the robots. So a solution to this is a socialistic one. Instead of having the people who own the robots take the profit, have the people who build the robots or work in the company who enable the robots, have them take the profit. Let the people who actually do the work make the money. Or make the profits, rather than having all of the profits be funneled upwards. Because then people would only have to work 20 hours a week and they could reasonably self-sustain themselves. They wouldn't have to work 40 hours and they, slaving or just sitting on a desk typing in things in a spreadsheet, right? My whole issue is just that because of the way the capitalist system is structured, the work that you put in doesn't necessarily correlate with the value that you get out. But if you're an owner, if say you're working in a co-op, for example, and you and all of your coworkers collectively own that company, well, then if the company does really well, if you guys all work really hard and hustle, now everybody gets a 10K bonus. And so there's more incentive for workers to do good work, and it prevents wealth accumulation, which I think is generally a bad thing. Anyway, sorry for the ramble.
No.
That's roughly my take.
You had a...
I was just going to say that I could be totally not even making sense here, but when you were talking about that hypothetical version where the workers, it's not capitalism, it's dependent on the workers all working with the same kind of efficiency, like all being the same caliber of worker, right? Like there's so many what's it called? Yeah, variables in real life to that sort of thing, you know, even like social dynamics between people and stuff, and you know, things that don't always, they're not just like regular quantifiable aspects of it.
So I think I know what you're saying. Like, let's say you have like a factory owned by 20 people.
Why
I think I think what we're putting down. Let's say you have a factory that's owned by 20 people, right? And they're the factory workers who work, and maybe there's like maybe one or two of them are like clean up after the 8 days of work or whatever, and maybe one of them is like the accountant or something. Maybe one of them, you know, works with you know, they have their you know, their what is it called, like their supplies, so that they can, you know, put it into the machines and do the thing. So, but you know, like they're all roughly, in principle, you know, they're all roughly working 8-hour days, whatever. And then maybe like you have maybe not 8 of your factory floor workers are really good, they're really efficient, you know, they care a lot about their work, and maybe like 1 or 2 of them are like kind of like lazy, right? Like that, like the fear is like, why do they deserve the same thing? Well, so in my lovely utopian world with these 20 factory
not
workers,
just lazy, but some of them are completely useless. Like there's
could be.
In a real life work environment, there are often people there that don't barely do anything, you know.
I think that's actually probably a problem with capitalism, actually. But
yeah.
But right. So in this hypothetical scenario with this factory that's owned by these 20 people who work in the factory, and they're the only workers in the factory, well, they would like, you know, they could still elect, like democratically elect a manager, right? Like just somebody who, like, you know, because you know when you're working on the factory floor, your eyes are not on everybody, making sure that everything's working properly. So maybe you elect the guy who went to you know, who went to business management school or whatever. Maybe you elect that guy to like keep an eye and make sure that everything's running properly, because that's a job too, right? Like management is a job, and it's work, just like assembling doodads. And so, you know, then that guy at the next co-op meeting might say, hey, so our efficiency is pretty good, except in this one area. These 2 guys don't seem to be working too efficiently, or they don't seem to be doing their job how they should be. Like, we all agreed that we would do such and such amount of work, and we would, you know, put in what we have. So how do we resolve that? And so maybe then the group comes together and is like, well, okay, and, you know, addresses maybe these 1 or 2 problem people. Like, look, you guys gotta like change the way you're looking, or we're gonna have to replace you, because right now, like we're all suffering because you're not putting in the same level of effort that the rest of us are. I think that that's a totally reasonable thing to do. You can still fire bad workers in a socialist system. What I don't want to say that we should do is we shouldn't like you can have workers who are less efficient, not optimally efficient, and I think it's okay that they make as much money as the people who are optimally efficient. Because, you know, like maybe they're just a little bit slower, or maybe they're just whatever, but they're still working as hard.
Yeah.
What I would care about in this utopian system is not necessarily the level of output. I mean, obviously output would be required to have a functioning system. But, you know, if you produce 100%, maybe I'm only at 90% of what you produce. Paying me the same amount, I'm still working just as hard as you. Maybe I'm just like slightly less good. Maybe I need a little bit more training. I think that us making the same amount would be fine. If I was producing 10% what you were producing, then that might be a problem, because I might be holding up the whole line. So I think that there is room for, you know, either constructive criticism to say like, hey, you need to get your ass in gear or you're out the door, or just firing people who are clearly not interested in actually putting in the work to make the whole thing work.
Go ahead. Sorry, I'm sorry.
No, you're fine. I was rambling, so you're good.
Some people's function in society might be difficult for like, you know, I don't know that it's always so easy to, it sounded like I was demonizing the person that doesn't do anything at the job, but some people's actual, like, what they do in the world or what they do in the workplace might not be always so easy to just like put on paper and explain. Like, you know what I mean? Like cause and effect. Like, I don't know if you've ever seen the show House. But it was often the episode would be like, you know, he would have his lackeys suggest things to him so he could say, no, not that. You know, like sometimes like that's the essence of a person is we don't be around. We don't want you to not be here, but you're here to pretty much be wrong. It's like that exists. I'm doing it right now. No, but that is like a factor. You know, I'm interested to get your take on that sort of thing.
So I mean, those exist in like corporate environments, right? Like the guy who like the idea guy, right? Whose most of their ideas are wrong. I don't think that can. I think that basically any system that can be run like in a capitalist system can be run basically as a worker co-op, perhaps more efficiently even. Like, you know, if a manager can recognize that this guy's useful, even though he's not producing like quantifiable output, like if some like corporate manager can do that, I don't see why an elected manager couldn't do that too. Yeah. Couldn't recognize, well, hey, maybe he doesn't look like he's producing a lot, but he's actually helping us innovate by kind of giving us like ideas or helping us, you know, stay on track or something like that. I think that my only the easiest change that would make me happy is just get rid of having an authoritarian manager put over the people who are actually doing the work, and just have the people who are doing the work actually like elect the people. And it's not like they're going to elect someone that says, you all get, you know, 100 days off a year, and because if their salary is dependent on their company actually producing value and actually succeeding, well, they're going to elect someone who will help them succeed rather than elect someone who will, you know, just let them not work at all. It's so much easier when you don't have personal investment in a company to not really care about your work, right? Like if you're just in a factory making doodads, it's so easy to just give the minimal amount of effort because regardless of how well you do, you're getting paid the same amount.
Yeah.
But when your efficiency directly impacts the profits of the business and thus your take home, you care a lot more.
Yeah, and it's also like you internalize it; it becomes a part of you. It's an extension of something that you're a part of. But I would also suspect that the hardcore capitalist defender would say, well, that's all fine and dandy, but if you go ahead and do that, this guy's just going to pick up his business and he's going to go somewhere else where he doesn't have to put up with that bullshit and just get more money. And so all those people who had jobs are not going to have jobs anymore. I'm coming from like the defender standpoint.
So
the devil's advocate would be like, well, they're just going to go someplace where there's less rules, and because the guy who makes all the money still wants to make all the money, so he's just gonna, you know, there's just gonna be a bunch of people out of jobs.
So I just want to point out something that you said. This is more, and then I'll address what you just said. You said that they become more connected with their work, right?
Yeah.
It's funny you say that because one of the things that, and I'm not a Marxist, by the way, because I don't do the whole Reed theory thing, but there is a notion of alienation of labor, which is exactly I believe the phrase was actually coined by Marx in Das Kapital, which is exactly what you're referring to, which is that once you no longer have a direct relationship with the outcome of your work, you become alienated from it. Anyway, it's funny that you bring that up because people like regular everyday people who haven't read Karl Marx, they're like, yeah, this is a real thing. He was talking about 150 years ago. Anyway, so to address your question, like this is where this is where you have to, you know, worry about policy, because you're right. Like if a whole bunch of people were just like, you know, if a whole bunch of Amazon, or let's not say Amazon because they're multinational. Let's say local hardware store, right?
Yeah.
Some guy owns a local hardware store, has 30 employees. If the employees go up to that local hardware store and say, hey, we want equal part in the profits, or we're leaving, the guy will be like, okay, leave. I'll just go open a hardware store one town down, and you know, I'll hire people that don't ask for that, right? But so that's where policy can come in. That can actually like both incentivize and help implement some of these ideas, which I think would be good policies.
Well, this is one of the problems we have right now is with lobbying, right? And all
100%. That's a huge problem. But I think that like for example, most companies, if the United States overnight became socialist, became worker run, right? Most companies, if they tried to move out of the United States and just, you know, say, well, you guys don't want to do capitalism here, so sorry, we're leaving, those companies would fail. Because most companies are based in the United States, and there's a reason they're successful. It's because of the infrastructure that we have, it's because of the consumer population that we have, it's because of the mass amounts of wealth that we have that a lot of companies succeed. And so I think that like if like, yes, if you implemented this in a city, it could drive things out of the city. But if you implement it in the entire United States, they're going to have a lot harder time leaving, and they'll just have to shut up and deal with it. Which I'm fine with, honestly. Like, I don't think that we owe Jeff Bezos anything. I don't.
Well, I think socialism, it's from what I've learned, and you can correct me if I'm wrong on this, is that it seems to thrive in smaller communities, but the greater the population, the more it expands, it tends to fall apart on itself because there's too much corruption that gets involved with socialism. It becomes like a communist problem. But if there's accountability in a tighter knit community, because if you can keep track of the money, if you can follow things, it's easier to manage. So if there was a way to maybe break things down into smaller knit communities that are taking care of like their healthcare, their education, things like that, it might have a chance.
So I mean, it's interesting to bring that up because there's this whole notion of like anarcho-socialists and anarcho-communists, and that's exactly what they want. Same with like anarchism. Originally was a left-wing ideal. It was a branch off of socialism in the late 1800s, early 1900s. It's kind of been co-opted recently by same with libertarianism, by the way. It's kind of been co-opted by the right wing. But it was originally a left-wing ideal, and the idea is that I mean, if you go to Israel, for example, there's things called kibbutzes or kibbutzim. They're like small communities. They're communes, basically, that operate under socialistic principles. You know, they elect their whatever. They all collectively own whatever. And there are some small regions in the world. There's a place called the Rojava province in Syria, or Greater Syria, I suppose, it's an autonomous region of Syria, and it is effectively socialist. It has some problems, like it still doesn't treat women that well, but it has a lot of these things, it has it's like a municipality, it's a region with a few major municipalities. So it seems like it can work on a small scale. I think even your most hardcore capitalists will say, like, yeah, socialism works in the home, or maybe it works in the neighborhood. And it is a problem, because, and we see it right now in our current political system too, regardless of what economic system, if you have a huge system, there's a lot of bureaucracy. Like, if you just look at our government system, there's just a lot of bureaucracy, right?
Yeah, it's
and
insane.
Bureaucrats make the existence of bureaucrats, and even more, even as a bigger example, like multinational companies, which bureaucrats are required for, it again alienates people from their labor. Because if you're working for co-op Amazon, let's say, worker co-op Amazon, and you're just you're putting this thing in this box, and that's all you do all day. Well, there's 100 or there's 1,000 other people doing the same thing. If you work a little bit slower, it's not going to affect your work, right? So there is certainly a potential problem with scale, at least in the sense that there's a problem with the degree to which people feel connected with what they're doing. And so I think that like this whole notion of anarcho-communism, anarcho-socialism, anarcho-syndicalism, all of that business is it's almost like the federal system that we have in the United States, right? Like the original idea, it's federalism. The original idea is that you would have these states that would self-govern, and then there would only be like some very, very like kind of low-level rules that everybody has to follow. Like you have to you can't discriminate, for example, based off of certain things, and you have to have elections, like certain fundamental rules that all of the groups agree to, and then those groups can figure out things on their own. And so at least in my if I were to construct a utopia, I would say, okay, we should have effectively we should have effectively very small government, municipality level and smaller. A few things should perhaps be federalized. These are things that we can earn economies of scale with. Healthcare would be a good thing to have an economy of scale with, because if you're paying for the healthcare of an entire country, it will be cheaper than each individual community paying for
here in Canada, we've noticed it
healthcare.
Fall apart here. We have a universal basic, and it's falling apart.
Yeah. So I've heard very bad things about the NHS in England. I've heard very bad things about Canada. I'm not saying that any one system is ideal, but I think that clearly economy of scale is a good thing, right? Like you can get, if you buy 1 million doses of a drug, it's going to be cheaper than 1,000 doses of a drug, right?
Yeah.
So if perhaps there could be a way that we could have some large scale systems these, and like, transportation is also probably another good idea, right? Like having like rails that connect one place to another is a good thing, right? Or highways, things like that.
Yeah.
Those, I think looking after those things on a broad scale is good, but like most things can probably be taken care of on a local level.
And it's not necessarily that the system is bad. It's just, well, maybe because it allows for too much thieving of the money. It's
What do you
like,
mean?
it really feels like we're constantly, I use this word a lot, being fleeced by our leaders because we're taxed into oblivion here in Canada, and we don't see the results of our taxation. It's not panning out. So, and
yeah, so, and I mean, it is a real problem. Like there is a notion. Okay, now I'm getting into more politics and less economics. Have you guys heard of this thing called liquid democracy?
No, I haven't.
So like, Canada has like a parliamentary system, right?
Yeah.
Okay, so the parliamentary system is fairly similar to the United States' like electoral system. You have a house that writes laws, right? You have one house or two houses?
I don't know. We have like federal, provincial houses.
But I mean, like on a federal level, like do you have one set of one?
I don't know. I think. It's
Okay, I think you have one because like I know the UK, they have the House of Lords and the House of Commons, right?
Okay.
And the House of Commons is really what does all the work, but there is still a House of Lords technically.
Okay.
So I mean, the US, we have two houses. We have senators and congresspeople, but it's closer to the UK than I think you guys. But the idea is that we elect representatives, and you guys do the same. We elect representatives that go make laws for us, right? And the idea is that they're professional lawmakers, so they know how to write laws well. And I think that for some very boring bureaucratic stuff, like, setting fines or speeding tickets and things that, like, you and I really don't care about, but they have to be, like, set in stone somehow, I think that professional lawmakers who know how to efficiently write laws, I think that that's fine. But there are issues like, where is our tax money going that you and I would like to have direct say on? We'd like to know exactly where it's going and see exactly how it's spent. So the notion of liquid democracy is kind of allowing for a gradient between direct democracy, which most people would say is not a good idea because it would take up too much of your time to vote on every single law, and a representative democracy. So the idea is as follows. Every single law that gets proposed initially gets proposed initially gets categorized. Maybe it's an environmental law, or maybe it's a healthcare law, or maybe it's an energy law, or maybe it's a traffic law, something like that. It gets categorized.
Yeah.
And so, and then it gets put to a national vote or a state vote, depending on whether it's a state or national law. And maybe it's on your phone, maybe you get a mail, whatever. And so you get the option of either directly voting on that thing, or you can delegate your vote to someone else. You just pick some other citizen.
Yeah.
And maybe you can, in the system, you can say, well, for every traffic law that's getting proposed, I want my vote to automatically go to this person. For every environmental law that is proposed, I want my vote to go to this other person. For every for social laws, I personally want to vote. For tax laws, I want my vote to go to this economist. And so the idea is that you can kind of sort who your representatives are for certain things. And so then your ideals are actually, and then maybe that person who you delegated your vote to, maybe they're like, well, on these very niche things, I want to actually delegate my vote to this expert in this field. So you kind of have like a tree filtering upwards of who gets votes for what, but it still leaves the option of every citizen to vote if they really care about something.
Yeah.
But it allows you to delegate on things that you maybe care less about. And so it's kind of like a weird mix, and it allows for, I think, more citizen interaction.
Seems like a lot of these ideas, like these progressive ideas of how things might go, are a little bit dependent on the intelligence of the people. You know what I mean? Like, as people become more aware, and like as people have more access to information, what if it seems like we're just kind of coming from a time where it wouldn't have been appropriate for people to have as much freedom as they do, but as society progresses and moves forward, and even to some degree gets a little more intelligent, more freedom is appropriate for those people.
You know, because you'd want to make educated guesses about, like, the last thing that you said in terms of, you know, extreme specialization for all these areas. You'd want to be as educated as possible when you're giving your vote to whoever, you know.
Yeah. So on the one hand, like the thing about liquid democracy is it really allows for kind of a transition, right? So like if the United States, for example, transitioned to this immediately today, I would bet that 90% of people would just delegate their vote to the leading Republican or the leading Democrat in their state, right? Yeah. And that's fine because the system wouldn't change. But then maybe you'd have 10 people who delegate, or 10% of the people who delegate, who think are a little bit more critical. They say, well, okay, this is actually an environmental law. I'm going to delegate it to maybe like an expert on environmental policy or something. And so it allows for like a slow shift where where really, like, if you wanted to play team sports, you can, but you don't have to. Because the system, at least that we're in the United States, and I'm actually, are you guys basically a two-party system, or do you have more than two?
We have more than two, but it's always the front runners are always the liberals and the conservatives.
Okay, so it's the same there. I mean, like at the end of the day, like right now, even if I don't want to play team sports, I have to. Like I have to vote Democrat if I want to have any say. Like I could vote Green Party or Libertarian Party or whatever, but those are not going to win anything.
Yeah,
I have to vote Democrat.
That's kind of like
it really is.
To me, you know?
Yeah,
but
I never vote for the two. I never ever vote for the two leading parties.
I mean, so in local elections, I won't. I'll actually look through who I'm voting for. But like, you got to be like, it's really hard to feel like you have an impact if they've never won in any election. Yeah. But anyway, the point about this notion of liquid democracy is it allows for a slow transition. As more people start to think more critically, then like it wouldn't be like just voting for another party. Because the people that you vote for can still vote for the things that you want,
right?
And it's not like your vote will lose if you don't delegate.
Is there anywhere that already does this system at all?
I don't think so. It's really a thing that I only heard about maybe a year or two ago, and it's very contingent, and like the idea really popped up in the early 2000s with the internet because it allowed people like this. I mean, this system could work by mail, but really it would function best in like some sort of networks, like perhaps decentralized network idea, where you can just like where for depending on the type of vote, your node just gets connected to the person that you're delegating to, and so you could like have some sort of like encrypted like blockchain type app on your phone or software on the internet or whatever that would let you do this, and so it's more natural in like the age of the internet to do, which is why I think there's probably not anywhere that does it.
No. So. Transitioning again, kind of off of what we're talking about, because we're talking about politics, the world we live, the way we live our lives, and vote for these people that represent us.
I gotta go to the bathroom again.
That's fine.
That's
a lot of the chaos that is going on in the world right now. Like, do you have an opinion on that? Like
the chaos. Oh.
Well, right now it just seems like the world is a dumpster fire. It feels like right now.
So, am I allowed to ask how old you are?
I am 42.
Okay, so you're like Gen X, right? Or maybe like maybe like elder millennial.
I'm not a millennial. I'm 1 year below the millennial.
Okay.
Millennial starts
like,
in 1981.
I was born in 93. I'm 29. Yeah. So like to me, and this is the meme, right? Like millennials grew up in a world that went to shit. Am I allowed to swear? Sorry.
No, you can.
Okay. Yeah. No. Yeah. We grew up in a world that was like one of my earliest memories is 9/11. So like that tells you like I was maybe 8 or something at the time. So like at 9/11, and then I'm graduating high school and I'm getting ready to think about like, well, maybe I'll be able to buy a house after college or something. And then there's the financial crash, and then after that, things were things were improving, and then it seems like every 10 years since millennials have been born, something horrible happens. The world falls apart. Now there's war in Europe. Like I don't know. It definitely seems like the world is worse than it was 50 years ago.
Yeah.
But I think I'm just used to it.
Yeah, it seems like COVID was definitely a world-shifting thing, right? It caused a lot of division, and I think it's kind of like exposed on a greater level a lot of the corruption within the systems that we have.
Yep.
And
I'll give you that.
we're making a big shift now. Now, do you think like we're moving towards the better or the worse? Are we becoming more conscious or less conscious?
Yeah, so if you had asked me in 2016, say 2015, which way the world was swinging, I would have said that the world was probably swinging in a better direction. Yeah. Maybe 2012, 2013, 2014. But it seems like, and
pre-Trump.
Well, I think honestly, I see Trump as more of a symptom of what happened, because like this kind of stuff was already. Are you guys familiar with like the whole SJW thing?
Social justice warriors.
Yeah. There was like with the advent of the internet in the late 2000s, early 2010s, I think that the notion of social justice kind of like bringing it to the forefront. I think that there's been a huge increase in social divisions everywhere. This is in Europe, North America. I mean, it's even making its like landfall in Asia now. Yeah. I don't know about Africa.
It's more intense in some ways too. It's almost like even if the same social divisions got.
Yeah, they got way worse. And so the thing that I'm worried about is that like you know, if you get me in a I obviously, like, I'm a socialist, I'm a progressive lefty, right? So like if you put me and a conservative in a room at the same time, and you get us talking about politics, we will both agree that, you know, these mega corporations, they're a real problem, right? They're hurting the everyday man, and we will both agree that, like, you know, we need to change the system. But then if you ask me about, you know, trans people or something like that, we are going to disagree a lot, and our votes are going to differ because of those social issues.
Yeah.
and then we'll hear in our media that the other people are evil, that they're either trying to ruin kids or that they're trying to, you know, exterminate such and such a group.
Yeah.
It seems like because of, and I blame this this SJW and anti-SJW thing that started happening in the early 2010s. I blame that for this division, for like the quote unquote culture war. Like, it seems like it's a real problem that's, like...
Obviously, there was some money. Obviously, there was something at stake for people to make it be the way you're describing it, you know?
Yeah.
Like, I'm going to write the most inflammatory article ever.
Yep. Clicks.
Yes,
it's clicks. It's all clicks.
Yeah.
You get more... It's called rage bait, right? For a reason.
Yeah.
Like you, and this is even bleeding over into like the real world of politics. I don't know. Are you guys allowed to talk about like Ukraine and Russia and stuff?
Anything
okay.
Goes.
I just don't know what YouTube allows. So like.
We don't either.
Yeah, fair enough. I just hope I don't get you banned. So like there are. So at least the United States is giving a lot of money to Ukraine, right?
Yeah.
And for the most part, the Democrats are totally in favor of giving bucket loads of money to Ukraine. And because of this like social division that's happening, like if you had asked the Republicans 20 years ago, Russia is invading a country in Europe, should we help them? There would be no question they would say yes. But because of this social division that's happening, it's almost like, and this happens when the right proposes something, the left just goes up against it too. Yeah. But it's just like, oh, one side is for this thing, well, we better be against it.
Yeah.
And so it's somehow ridiculous. You have conservatives who are like, yeah, I mean, the Ukrainians, like, they do have some Nazis, so maybe we shouldn't be supporting them because, you know, they're actually the bad. Like, come on. Like this is something that we can come together on. Why can't we just do a good thing? It's like this whole like division it's a problem, and it's everywhere. And and it's a social problem. It's not an economic problem. It's not a policy. It's not like some foreign policy thing. Like, you know, we might disagree about borders, we might disagree about tax policy, whatever. But like people hate each other.
Which is ridiculous. I don't get this, man, because it's not like, how boring would the world be if we all believed the exact same thing?
Yeah.
Like, we clearly don't, like, if you watch any of our content, you would know that probably we don't agree on everything. But we can sit here and have a conversation cordially and just...
Okay, but remember the example that I gave earlier about House and his lackeys that are pretty much there to just their ideas be shot down? I think that's like how it is in life sometimes. Like, you know, people are constantly trying to fix problems and stuff
Yep.
But I think there is a way to look at everything and the progression of man from the beginning to now and see that it's all pretty remarkably seamless and on purpose. You know, like certain politicians may only rise to power to inspire people that will be their antithesis later on. Like, there's a way of looking at these things and seeing the progress that's happened along the way. You know, I don't know. That's the best. I think that's. I've said what I'm trying to say in terms of that. But like, yeah, there are problems, but it kind of boils down to preference too. You know, like different people have different desires of what they want to see the society they live in look like.
Yeah,
and it's
fine.
not always clear. It's not always like objectively clear what is right. Of course, people that are self-biased are going to think that their way is the best.
Yeah, no, that's certainly true. But my and I think that we're just agreeing. Like, there is a lot of like hate, basically, between progressives and conservatives, liberals and well, no, it'd be liberals, no, progressives and conservatives, liberals and I guess, like, you know, I don't even know, because progressive and liberal are almost, anyway, there's a lot of hate between, like, the two sides of the political aisle, economic, social, whatever. Yeah. And I don't know, like, I don't know how you fix that. Like, the internet seems to have made it worse.
Yeah. Collect all the data.
I don't know, we're talking. I think it's good that we just need to continue talking, and I think a lot of the hate comes from the bigger entities. I blame a lot of this not just on the internet, but on mainstream media. If you ever watch Fox and CNN bicker amongst each other,
oh yeah, no, it's terrible.
Ridiculous. It's
but millennials don't watch TV anymore.
Now it's just opinion pieces on why the other news station's stupid. It's not even news. It's ridiculous. I'm like, what are you watching? Get that out of your life. And sit down and have open conversations with people who don't necessarily think the same way you do, and, you know, have a good conversation, enjoy it. Why does everyone have to believe the same thing that everyone else believes? Doesn't make any sense.
So there is some validity to, like, you know, politics is all about convincing the other side that you're right so that you can get more votes, right? Yeah. So there is some validity to, like, trying to sway minds and try to bring people over to your side, because, you know, like, for example, I hope we all agree that, like, you know, everybody should have equal rights. Like, that's a thing that we all like. But, you know, in the early 18th or late 18th century, early 19th century, not everybody agreed on that. So I'm glad the people who thought that everybody should have equal rights more or less won out. Like, I'm glad that happened. I'm glad that, like, we were able to kind of, like, convince them that, yeah, they should agree with us, that it's not really okay to have, like, a different opinion about that. There are some things that are, like, kind of, I think, bare minimum. Like, I'm not a huge fan of Nazis. Like, I'm Jewish, so, like, clearly they're not a huge fan of me either. You know, I've heard stories about, like, you know, like, Nazi marches, like, going through the streets, and I'm like, I don't want those shut down, but I'm also gonna make fun of you on Twitter for it.
Yeah.
Like,
yeah.
I'm okay with, like, social ostracizing people with, like, really, like, dangerous, like, violent belief systems. I'm fine with that. But, like, you know, if you're just, like, you know, and sorry for bringing this up again, because this is the hot button issue right now amongst socials or progressives and conservatives, which is, like, you know, if you're like, well, okay, I don't actually know what the science is about you know, trans people in sports, for example, right? So, like, but I also really like women's basketball or whatever. So can we, like, do more science first and then try to figure out before we, like, possibly, like, destroy a system? That's a take that, while I disagree with, like, you can, like, I'm fine with you having that take. And, you know, if, like, I don't think it's reasonable to, like, shout someone off of a stage or, you know, get them banned off social media for having that opinion, for being like, you know, like, maybe I'm just not so sure and I like this thing, so can we, like, be more careful? That's fine. What things that I'm not fine with are, like, oh, like, I don't know. I guess what I'm not fine with is systems that seem to target groups. I don't like that at all.
I agree. I think most sensible people would agree with everything that you've said there in terms of, like, not liking Nazis and all that type of thing.
Well, except the Nazis, they like Nazis.
What's that? Who's that?
The Nazis like Nazis. They're the other people who do.
I'm of the mind, like, I've literally been talking to people before and been like, I want everybody to come together, and then be like, no, ew. Like, right. I don't want that. Their preference is for people to not come together. That's what they want.
Yep.
Right? And so, I think it's a good step for humanity that we go from literally, well, you disagree, I'm going to bash you over the head or give you mustard gas. I think it's a good step for humanity to go from that to let's have a discourse about it. You know, give me your smartest guy that's saying your side of the thing, and I'll give you my smartest guy or girl or whatever to say our side of the thing, and let's hash this out, you know, keeping in mind the data and what's most objectively true. Let's bring that to the table, you know, because sometimes I think that there are facts that are brought out that are not always pleasant to hear, you know?
Yeah.
Like, what happens if you fall into some demographic that's like, just on paper does not have some advantage that some other demographic has because of just genetics or something like that. But if you can't talk about it, that's what leads to violence, is the inability to openly discuss the stuff. It's like, well, if there's no discussion, then the only option left is physical revolt, you know?
Yep.
So, sorry.
So, devil's advocate here. This is not necessarily the position I take, but I can imagine a world, and I'm kind of leaning, like,
Sorry for yelling.
I'm not suggesting revolution here. I'm not suggesting violence. But, well, not even to start with that with the but. I'm not suggesting either of those. And then also the separate thing. So, there is something to be said that if you take the side of the status quo, for example, I don't know where you guys fall on the conservative liberal spectrum. How do you guys feel? Are you guys pro gay marriage, against gay marriage?
No, I'm fine with it. I don't.
Okay, so let's go back in time 20 years.
I was trying to think of something funny, but obviously, yeah. I'm pro gay marriage too.
Just making sure. I don't. So like go back 20 years. There's a large swath of like conservatives who weren't actually, and in fact, a lot of progressive or a lot of liberals weren't either, right? So like if you ask, if you get you get the progressives who are like, yeah, no, we should have gay marriage, and then you get the people who are like, yeah, no, we shouldn't have gay marriage. And then you say, okay, well, instead of just like trying to force your laws through or protesting until until gay marriage is a thing, why don't we just talk about it? Well, in a sense, that favors the status quo, right? Because gay marriage was already illegal at the time. And just by talking about it means that that's taking much, much longer for that process for us to get to where we ought to go. So there is like I can understand the urgency because, if we just take the slow, methodical route of let's just talk about it and sway people over slowly, well, that's more time that people are, not having equal rights. Yeah. So, I can understand why there are protests and, why people get angry. And, I can understand that because, if you just have two, 70-year-old, politicians arguing for 2 years about, about whether or not gay people should be allowed to sign a paper that legally binds them, well, that means that's 2 years that gay couples can't get married.
Yeah, it won't
whereas if you just protested and annoyed the crap out of the politicians until they gave in, well, that you get better outcomes sooner.
Yep.
So I can understand that perspective. I don't know what the solution is because also riots are bad. So
no, I like what you said though because it's true. There's not it's very hard to find a solution where it's like, bam, that's the solution and done. It's like, that's not the case, right? So it's it's nice to be able to talk about stuff, but a nefarious person could use that, or maybe not even a nefarious person. It's just exactly how you said. You said it perfectly. It could take too much time, given the status quo. Yeah. So it's not always the best thing to do, even in a culture that has the ability to talk things out. It's like you got to go a little extra further.
Well, life is also wildly nuanced on these situations, right? It's not like everything's just black and white. There are aspects of say progressive ideas. We were just using the example of gays or the LGBT community or transgenderism. You can still be right with parts of that thing, but not fully. Say the education system. I got nothing against transgender people. I think it's fine, whatever. But you might be, if you're in some rural, town up in, it might just be, parents might be like, do we need to be teaching all this stuff at like grade 3? Like, is there a way to or how are we teaching it and who's teaching it? You know, some kid might be, you know, like, I like to play with Barbies. It doesn't mean he's a transgender kid. If it's a boy playing with a Barbie or something, it doesn't mean like, but
just likes Barbies.
This is where a lot of fear gets in with parents and stuff like that, right?
Yeah.
They're like, can we like calm down here with the unicorn painting for the kindergartens? Like, let's just let kids be kids. They don't even give a shit about this stuff. Like, they're like, and you may disagree. I don't know where you stand on it, but there's like, where do we? Let's like work this out. Like, let's talk about this and just shove this all in. There could be consequences to that.
There's only so much that can be done in a lifetime, right? Like, there's only so much a culture can do, and there's only so much an individual can do, right? So I mean, part of this is understanding time, right? Like, if you were like, say I understood something about the future in terms of, you know, something approximating like gender issues, like when we were kids, it was not as common as it is now. But
Sure.
if you saw the next stage coming, but you were like way ahead of your time, and you got really your behavior or your approach to trying to show this to humanity didn't fit the time period that you were in, or you weren't tactful enough, or you didn't keep in mind, you know, the culture to which you were bringing this information to. You know, all those things are, you know, I think part of this, what we're talking about, where humanity's going.
Yeah, no, I mean, what's the phrase? I'm picking up what you're putting down. So I mean, you're right. Like, if we had tried to bring, you know, and you know, like, it very clearly is the hot button issue, because, you know, 20 years ago we may not have, well, now like the trans issue is the hot button issue, right? So if I had brought back, let's say, something that we all agree on, civil rights, at least in the United States in the 60s and 70s, we all agree that civil rights is, I hope we all agree that civil rights is a good thing.
Yeah.
The civil rights movement, generally a good thing. But if you brought that back 250 years, like, that was out of the question.
Yeah.
It still would have been a good thing if it happened back then.
Yeah.
But you would have had a very hard time convincing people. And I can understand why there is a hard time convincing people now. The trouble is I think that there's a lot of, like, I think it's worse today, because with the existence of, like you said, the mainstream media, like people can exist in echo chambers that and you know, obviously I didn't live in the 70s, 60s, 50s, whatever, so I can't know, but like, it seems like because there's a place for everyone on the internet, there's a place for every belief system on the internet.
It's like
and
echo chambers on steroids. It's like the most crazy echo chambers. Yeah.
And so like, if the ideal goal is that, you know, all of one side, they all elect their smartest guy to talk about this, then all of the other side, they all elect their smartest lady to talk about all of this, and then they hash it out, and then those smartest people, when they come to some agreement, they tell their respective people, like, hey, this is the outcome, this is, you know, this is the reasonable thing, and they convince their people. That'd be great. Except that doesn't happen, right? Like it's not a thing that can happen, because there's so many people that are so entrenched because of these echo chambers. If I, like, example, Ben Shapiro, right? Like, he's dude's a conservative, right?
Yeah.
You guys know Ben Shapiro?
Yeah.
Okay. If Ben Shapiro had a conversation with, I don't know, who's like an equivalent, let's say Sam Cedar. He's like a kind of like a major, not as big as Ben Shapiro, of course, but like he's like a major-ish lefty progressive type, not like full socialist, but like, you know, that type. And if Sam Cedar, you know, through facts and logic, convinced Ben Shapiro, you know, actually, you were wrong about this thing. And then Ben Shapiro's like, yeah, actually, you know what, I think that's a good point. Ben Shapiro wouldn't be able to convince his people. His people would just ostracize him. Similarly, if Ben Shapiro convinced Sam Cedar, yeah, and it goes both ways. It's not just the right or the left that's entrenched. It's just like, oh, your leader no longer agrees with you? Well, time to get a new one.
Yeah. It is horrifying to me to think that you could have a situation where Ben Shapiro is across from somebody like the person you said, and Ben Shapiro say, you've changed my mind. You've actually convinced me, and you know what? I'm actually sorry for where I was rigid before,
Yep.
and that would cause chaos. That would actually cause chaos is upsetting to me. Like, you should be able to admit when you're wrong.
And the thing is this follows into the whole, like, you know, like with regards to parents, right? Like parents in small towns or whatever. Like, those parents in small towns, like, people's beliefs don't form from nowhere. Obviously, they form from your friends, your family, your, you know, what you read, what you watch, all of these things. It's really hard for, you know, a parent comes up to a teacher, and maybe the parent says, "Why are you teaching this?" And the teacher says, "You know, I'm teaching this because X, Y, and Z," or whatever. That's not a conversation that's going to lead to an agreement, right? Because both the teacher and the parent are entrenched in their views.
Yeah.
And so what you end up with is you know, some laws being passed based on just the majority, or maybe by the supermajority or whatever. But that doesn't like account for the beliefs of the other group, because they just, like, I mean, I'm sure you've heard the examples in, like, I want to say, like, South Carolina or something, like maybe North Carolina, where, like, basically, like, various things have been banned to talk about in schools. But, like, those yeah, no, well, like, it's a mess. Like, those kinds of laws, they don't account for nuance. They're not like, they weren't argued in the state houses to be like, oh, okay, well, you know, they didn't convince the other side that these laws are good. They just had more people. And so you end up with laws being passed. I mean, it's tyranny of the majority, right? Like, you end up with laws being passed that some people vehemently agree with, and other people think is madness. And it, like, I don't know how you solve that problem. I don't know how you convince, like, it seems like you can't even have democracy if you can't convince everybody that you're right. You'll always end up with some people that are unhappy.
Well, this is kind of like, it's like the dirty side of evolution. Sometimes, like, these mistakes need just to keep being made and made over until, like, the ugliness of it is so transparent that we, like, okay, you know, we have to fix it.
That's why I was saying I think that it's got to be like a burden sometimes on hyper-intelligent people to look around and be like, there's only so much I'm going to be able to do given this generation. You know, like, I can fix this and I can fix that. If I'm really clever and I've got a lot of tact, my part can be to do this. But I honestly think that for some people, they can see all the nonsense and can't do everything about it. Can't fix it. And so,
it's frustrating.
Yeah, so part of it is
Not me, by the way.
part of, like, that goodness is that you're actually thinking in terms of, like, I may be helping generations down the line. Like, if I do my part and I can get some other people to do their part, this will have an effect for future generations, maybe.
Maybe,
you know, you don't even always get to, maybe my kids, you know, if I'm part of this now. I don't know. So, how do you make yourself feel better about the fact that there are some things that are the way they are because people are short-sighted?
So can I slightly change? It's still related, but can I slightly change the topic? So do you guys have something called? I think it's either hostile architecture or malicious architecture. Do you guys have that in Canada?
I don't know what you're talking about.
So do you guys have a homeless problem in Canada?
A little bit, yeah. It's getting bigger. More so in BC, I think, right now.
So I mean, clearly, like, there's a huge homeless problem in, like, a lot of major U.S. cities, right? Like LA is really bad, San Francisco is really bad, Chicago, New York, really bad.
Yeah.
And it's tragic. So there's this thing that like, you know, you walk around, you walk by, like, a supermarket or whatever, and you see a homeless guy up front, and you're like, okay, you can do your part and maybe give him, like, $5-10 or whatever, just to help him out. But that's not going to solve the problem, right? And then you walk by, and this thing, it sounds so dystopian. You will see cities, and, like, even in the most progressive cities that exist, like San Francisco, the town I live in, very progressive cities, they will, like, put, like, spikes on the ground in places where people would otherwise sleep, or they'll make benches, like, slightly angled, so if you try to sleep on it, you'll fall off, or they'll put, like, bars on the benches so it's not long enough for you to sleep on. There are legitimate things that cities vote for that basically make it, like, impossible just to live as a homeless person in that city. So it basically, it sounds like straight out of like a dystopian novel, right? Like, oh, all of the benches have spikes, so we don't have any homeless people. That's it's terrible.
I feel
but
like if somebody were to come to me and be like, well, tell me why that's bad, I'd be like,
right?
I'm not going to waste my time telling you why that's bad. Just know that you're
But the
dumb.
thing is so like, right, like, so I'm an academic, like you said, like, there are things that I'm good at. So like, I do like I try to spread like science on TikTok, and I like do some misinformation stuff. Like, if I hear some like conspiracy theory stuff, like about stuff that I'm interested in, like I find myself on the flat Earth business about a lot, because that's mostly physics. Like, I do my bit to try to kind of like dispel misinformation in that regard. But like, I see this problem, you know, massive amounts of homeless people being bussed in from other states to California, for example. You know, malicious architecture so that these homeless people can't like get a good night's sleep. And I'm like, what am I supposed to do about that? I'm not the person that can fix that, but I still see the problem. And like, you know, that it feels bad to see. Not that like I'd rather it just be hidden. I want that problem to be fixed, but I'm just one guy. Like, what am I supposed to do?
Where does the responsibility lie? Is it on the elite, or is it on the people to become more intelligent? Because, like I said there, you know, I'm not kidding. If somebody came to me and was like, you know, I don't get what the problem is. That is a good way to get the homeless people off the benches. Like, I wouldn't know where to begin to, like, you know, it's not worth it for me to explain to you why that's wrong, because even if I gave you the eventual answer, you'd be like, well, there's too much work for my brain to do. I'm not thinking about it. Like, you know, they're not willing to go through all of the reasons that are why that's messed up. So I think it's just time. I think it's just going to take time, and believe it or not, there's still crazy stuff like that in this age of information in the internet. There's still going to be stuff like that that's happening. It's disappointing.
So I guess the solution is just be mad about it.
I don't
know what else to do.
No. The solution is what we're doing. Somebody's going to watch this, see how mad I am about it, and maybe do something.
But like people like you and me, people who aren't, you know, experts on city architecture. Maybe you are. I don't know. People who don't have like huge amounts of influence. Like all we can do, like, we see this obvious problem, but all we can do is just like be grumpy about it, right? Like this is terrible.
No, I think that there is something you can do. You can pave the way. I think that there's a way to be a leader in certain ways. Like, it's too bad, because there's a way that you could live as an example, and then, you know, people would follow suit. But what do you do in a culture where it's like, to be seen as someone worth listening to, you've got to give in to a whole bunch of like shallow aspects of culture. You know what I mean? It's like, they don't have like a butt job and lip implants, and, you know, so I'm not even going to listen to what they have to. What do they know? They don't even look beautiful. Like, but there is still some things you can do, I think. Like, anywhere that you can live as an example, and, you know, take those opportunities to, you know, I sound so full of myself. No, I am a flawed person, but I think that the answer to these problems is like still doing the right thing, you know, where you can.
As best we can, as we raise, you know, if you want to call it a vibration, that's so hippy dippy, but you know, your empathy and your love, and, you know how you treat others and stuff like that. I think these are all beginning points as we learn to do that better. And understand that people are just an extension of yourself. What you do to someone else, you're doing to yourself, essentially. Because, you know, who knows? Maybe that will be you on that bench one day.
Also, what is your side of it? What do you think is the best way?
Oh, I don't know. Those were honest questions. Like I can't, like, all I can do is vote, right? Like that's the best thing. I can vote, and I can like be mad on the internet, I guess, and hope that somebody's convinced.
Well, we talked about it, right? We hash it out. This goes to the forefront.
Exactly.
Someone's gonna watch this, even if it's one person. You know, someone
you're getting like 50, 100 views. That's
sometimes.
That's
Wait a minute! All we did was demonize people for not knowing why the pointy architecture is bad. No,
honestly, look it up. Like, so I was talking with the woman from Denmark who runs the flat Earth things on TikTok. She had never heard of it either, and she was like, "How are people doing?" Like, it it is like wild. If you go on Google Images and you just look up like malicious architectures or whatever it is, you'll find it. It's
Why is
wild.
there so many homeless people? Why is there so many homeless people?
Yeah, the better question.
Start there.
Actually,
Yeah.
the reason why there's so many homeless people in California is because states actually ship them to California. They give them a bus ticket and say, here, go to California. Like it's an actual, like, it's wild that happens, that other states are shipping their homeless people to California. But in principle, it makes sense because California is one of the few states where you can actually just live outside year round and not die. Whereas if you're in like Minnesota, you will just straight up die in the winter.
Yeah.
So it like makes sense, but it's still like, why are there homeless? Why not just give your homeless people the houses or something? Like, solve the problem. Don't just give it to someone else.
Yeah. Figure out why.
Even if your thing was like, yeah, well, there's more of them now than there used to be. Like, why is there more now then?
Yep.
What are we doing to the world? Stop making drugs.
that'd be great.
Stop making people crazy with all these weird lifestyle things.
Treat schizophrenia like an actual like illness, and rather than just saying that they're crazy, like things like that.
Yeah. And stop building a world that makes more of these problems. Like, well, you can't have your cake and eat it too. Like, I just want to be able to live in a completely capitalist society because I've got the skills to be richest. But I honestly think some people want there to be a contrast between what they have and like, I don't want the homeless people to go anywhere because I want to be able to look and see that I'm doing better than other people. Like, that could be a real reality of how people in our modern age like live. Like, I need the contrast. That's why when I say to somebody like, I want everybody to be together and everybody to have the same thing, they're like, no, I don't want that. Why don't you want that? Because you want a distinction between yourself and other, and to know that you're winning. Really.
Yep.
That's horrifying. We don't have a chance if that's how people live.
I'm with you on that. You're sounding like a lefty to me.
Sure, maybe I am. I don't know. I've never like plotted myself there.
Yeah, I don't. But anyway, we've killed it for a good 2 hours now.
No.
I do have to get back to my family and
Reasonable.
life, and I'm sure everyone has
I should probably be packing.
things to do.
And I gotta take another leak.
And so I want to say thank you so much, Sam, for coming on the show and talking to us about stuff. It's been great. I'm going to leave a link for your TikTok channel in our description box so you guys can go find Sam and everything that he's all about. Of course, all of our core living stuff is all there too. And everybody who's out there, well, you know what? Before I say that, Sam, do you have any final words? Is there anything you want to do?
No, just thanks for the awesome conversation. I love doing this, so I appreciate it.
That's what we do. So, if you like the show, everyone, don't forget to hit the like, subscribe, share with a friend, and everybody, until next time, stay spiritual.